Hi everyone, welcome to latest in the series of webinars from Pebble Beach. Slight change to normal. Normally we're live on a Thursday morning. This one's pre-record, and I'm joined by Andrew Peel, who is Pebble Beach's Head of Trust Fundraising and has led all of our work in trust fundraising for the last 8 years. And we're going to be focusing on trust fundraising today and looking at what the situation is now, how the world has changed over the last 18 months, and what we think the options for the future are, and just looking at the key elements of trust fundraising for everyone as we move forward and sharing some of those experiences. First of my jobs is just to embarrass Andrew by welcoming him and giving us a bit of his background. Hugely experienced fundraiser, over 25 years, and has held significant fundraising management roles for Help the Aged, for British Red Cross, and for Sightsavers as well. And a hugely experienced and successful trust fundraiser. And I've had the pleasure of working with Andrew for the last 8 years on a variety of projects, from small local regional charities raising small amounts of money to fund really important stuff, up to huge multi-million-pound capital appeal projects. And what we wanted to do today was, at this particularly important time when trust fundraising is in a bit of flux, is actually just to take a moment to look at the trends, to look at what's happening in the world, and to try and give some sense of structure for trust fundraising in the future. So Andrew, hello to you. Hope that you're well. So super embarrassed you by sharing your CV there. So first, Andrew, I think that the first question from me here, and you are the expert in trust fundraising, and I'm not, is can you just give a sense of an overview? So how has trust fundraising been over the last 18 months since the pandemic started? What are the kind of changes that you've seen in the world?
Well, I think what's so interesting is that the range of responses by the funders that are out there. So some funders have been absolutely amazing. So Children in Need, down here we've got Sussex Community Foundation, the Masons. They've been actively approaching the charities that they've supported before, or which they're supporting now, and saying, guys, how can we help? Do you need more support? What can we do? Others are in total chaos. I spoke to one the other day saying, look, send your application in. I don't know when we can meet. All the trustees are over 70. They don't do Zoom, so it may be another year before we meet. Some funders have totally changed tack. So whereas they may once have been supporting capital causes, capital projects, they've realised the importance of the revenue and core funding, and just gone, okay, we'll suspend that. Ask us for core. Others have maintained a steady course. So look at Henry Smith Charity; they have continued to fund what they've always funded, and that's of huge help. Some are making really swift decisions and kind of trying to get the money out there as quickly as they can to help charities with cash flow problems, and others are just taking an age over decisions. I had two responses recently, positive responses from Capital Project, two well-known funders. One took 15 months to reach the decision, one took 11 months. Positive outcomes. But it just shows you that they're in a complete state of flux. I think it's also interesting looking at how certain funders are making sort of more strategic and well-measured decisions. So, for example, the John Lyon charity, which is a big funder of children and young people's projects in London, the trustees have decided to tap into their endowment, and they're going to be providing £22 million worth of funding over the next 6 years. And that's the charities, particularly the charities that they've supported before. And I was listening to their chief executive the other day, and she was saying that the reason for that is that they want to safeguard their previous investments for future generations. They see that if the charities that they funded before go to the wall, then all of their funding in the past has been wasted. The other really interesting change in the funding environment, I think, is the change of mindset of the particularly bigger funders. Most people will have heard of the Flexible Funders campaign, which is really around big funders, such as Comic Relief, Esme Fairbairn, John Ellerman, City Bridge Trust, quite a lot of London funders as well, they've adopted a much more open, transparent approach to funding. And I think this has come about because COVID has changed everything, in the sense that they realise that there's no longer room for that more old-fashioned paternalistic, we know best approach. And they're saying, if we're going to solve some of these major societal problems, COVID is a health emergency and an economic emergency. It's affected charities in so many ways, both from a service delivery and a financial point of view. They're saying this has got to be a partnership. So they're trying to make the processes, the process of application easier and swifter, and just trying to get the money out there more quickly and making it more of a partnership. So I think it's a very interesting situation.
So I was going to say, so that word partnership is really important. So that, to me, sounds really positive. The fact that actually a lot of the funders are realising that it isn't just that send an application and we'll consider it and then we'll tell you 12 months later. There's an engagement that actually the work that the charities are delivering is the end goal of the trust in the first place, and therefore it benefits them to work in partnership, to support and to help the charities move forward in a more structured and strategic way.
Totally. And I think that's what trust fundraisers need to remember, is that it is about, your work enables the funders to meet their own charitable objectives, albeit vicariously in most cases. Most funders, most trusts and foundations do not do work on the ground. Yet they have been established usually by wealthy people in years gone by who had a very clear vision of the world. And it's your role as a trust fundraiser to understand what that vision is and to press the buttons of the funders. I remember years ago, I heard a brilliant description. It was a guy called Alan Eagle, he was head of the Santander Foundation, and he said, trust and foundations, if you look at them like cash machines, if you press their buttons in a certain way, they will get quite a lot of money for you.
I love that analogy. That's great.
Really good. It's a really good analogy, And I think I have my see it from both sides, because I'm also a trustee of a grant-making trust in Brighton, and we give. It's very clear what we give to. So we are our roots are in the Church of England. We support charities which support women's and children's projects in Brighton and Hove. We also support Church of England schools and Church of England churches. We don't support horse charities in East Grinstead. We don't support talented musicians in Uttoxeter, and we don't support microbreweries in Hampshire. Okay? If you apply to us and you've read our guidance and you use the language that we use in our application forms and our materials, and you show respect for our history and our traditions and our raison d'etre, you press our buttons, and we're really likely to give you a grant. So it's in one way it's as simple as that, but it's about doing the homework and doing the research and understanding what the trust's view of the world is and enabling them to meet that.
So therefore, looking at the future, if we look at the next 18 months or so, it's not simply a return to how trust fundraising used to be, where it may be, Andrew, when you and I first started fundraising back in the Cretaceous period, there was the 1 in 3. Do you remember? It was I got in when I first led a fundraising team. My understanding of trust fundraising was that you send out 3 applications and one of them was going to work, and it was literally just about sending applications out. That's changed now, hasn't it? That is, it's no longer simply a this game. It's about an engagement plan. Yeah.
The problem is, it's for all trust fundraisers now, it's much more competitive than it was even 5 years ago.
Yeah. And
COVID again has changed everything, in that if you're sending an application to a funder, you're up against community interest companies, you're up against churches, you're up against schools, you're up against lots of local organisations, but also national organisations who a few years ago would never have considered applying to the funders that you're applying to.
Yeah.
So the only solution to that is to be even more brilliant than you've ever been before. So that's about getting your ducks in a row and making sure that the application that you're putting in is just superb and off the scale.
And we can talk about the process there, but I think just coming back to something you said a bit earlier about the John Liner Foundation, for example, about saying that we want to protect that investment. If an application is successful, if you build that relationship, it seems now much more likely that you're going to be able to retain that relationship because you've demonstrated that trust, that you are a safe pair of hands that spend their money wisely and delivered, benefit from their investment.
Yeah, again, putting my trustees hat on, we had a meeting yesterday with the trustees, and we had a number of applications from charities that we'd supported before, and a couple from those that had never applied before. And inevitably, we're much more comfortable looking at what the charities we funded before have done, whether we're happy with that, whether they said thank you. There are a couple of trustees on my trustee board who, if someone hasn't said thank you, they literally go in the bin. So that's worth noting. So yeah, it's a question of really making that connection.
So Andrew, therefore, setting the scene therefore, in future, it is all the more important that the key principles of successful trust fundraising are followed. Yeah. And in our structure, again, I speak as a more generalistic fundraiser, and my starting point for everything is always audience, is always understanding who it is that we're speaking to, because only through that knowledge can we actually, as you say, properly tailor the application. If we were going to your trust, we need to know you and understand you, etc., etc. But I think there's a step back from that. Firstly, what I've certainly seen working with you over the last few years is a number of charities where there isn't the engagement between the organisation, between perhaps the board of trustees or the senior management team, and the trust fundraiser. The trust fundraiser is not simply a machine that can fire out applications and to bring in some money. There has to be an engagement. I mean, do you see that? Is that starting point of being part of the organisation?
One of our mantras, Ash, as you know, has always been that trust fundraising it's an organisational effort. It's a team sport.
Yeah.
And where we've seen the best trust fundraising over the years has been where the chief exec gets it, where the trustee gets it, where the operational service delivery staff get it. Where you have problems is where pieces of that jigsaw are missing. And where the trustees have just said to the chief executive, said to the trust fundraiser, just here's your target. You go and raise money, and that is just, I feel so sorry for trust fundraisers in that situation, because
we spoke to someone just like that quite recently, didn't we? Where someone basically said they've just been given a fundraising target, and there's no basis of evidence for whether that's optimistic, pessimistic, achievable. It's just, here's some money, go and raise it.
It's madness, and I think what a lot of charities miss is the fact that trust fundraising works best when it's project-led. So funders generally like projects. If you're saying to your trust fundraiser, we need to raise £100,000 unrestricted, then you're setting them up to fail, because you're not playing to the strengths of trust fundraising. But if you can, what we do a lot of course, actually, is we'll work with charities, and we're helping them package up their work as projects. And often they've not even thought of what they do as being projects. So we're trying to create projects that often a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but and projects at different stages. So it might be a new piece of work, it might be a piece of work that's been running for a couple of years, which we can still call a project because we're evaluating it and monitoring it. And then perhaps years 5, 6, then we can still say it's a project because we're assessing it, considering whether it's viable, sustainable, and so forth. So it's just about being creative. But you cannot run trust fundraising in a little pocket. It has to be organisational. And it's all working smoothly. It's all working together. It is a really satisfying, wonderful thing.
And we've seen the benefits of that, particularly in capital appeals, when there's that alignment and that trajectory is shared. Before we just get onto the proposition, because I do want to ask you about proposition and what kind of things that trust will function. In looking at audience, I know from our work together that you have spent a considerable part of time of engagement where we've been supporting charities on the research side, on the understanding side. And I think there's a number of times when our charity clients that we've worked with have been surprised at the amount of time spent on the thinking before any doing happens. And sometimes, particularly for trustees and SMTs, that can be a frustration. But how important is that, you know, getting that audience understanding, looking at the potential prospects, you know, what impact does that have on success?
I think it's everything. You know, it's that the groundwork is so important. And yes, we're often under pressure to say, you know, from trustees and senior managers of charities saying, well, why aren't you raising money yet? And you know, I think the most successful trust fundraising is that which has the deepest foundations and has been approached in the most strategic way. You know, so I think it's about, there's a lot of trust fundraising is kind of that desk-bound, that research, that thinking, but it's not wasted. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Bernard Ross or one of those marvelous gurus from our early days. Ash,
I remember Bernard. Yeah.
He used to talk about the onion, you know. And when you're approaching trust fundraising, think about it as the onion. So at the core of the onion, you're looking at who's funded you before and who's funding you now. So those are inevitably your best prospects. And then the outer ring is, you know, perhaps going back, you know, a little bit further and looking at who was responsible for setting up the charity. And then the next ring might be, you know, who do your trustees know? Which individuals, well-connected individuals, are close to the charity. And inevitably, you're then going to get to the outer rings, which are like the cold prospects. But then there are some cold prospects that are going to be slightly warmer than completely cold prospects. So I'll start looking, for example, at which other charities are operating in the same space as you. Perhaps put together a top 5 or a top 10 list of other charities doing similar work. Looking at their annual reviews over the last 5 years on the Charity Commission. Who's funded them? Who's funded them? And then doing a reverse check and looking at those funders and actually seeing whether they, you know, at what level they funded the charity in question. And then you pull together a picture. And so none of this is wasted time. And eventually you'll end up with a good, solid prospect list and pipeline, prioritized in terms of warmth, in terms of size of donation or potential donation, in terms of the fit with your work, and also in terms of when an application can be made. And this can take several months. When it's all good to go, you can implement 3 to 5 years.
I just know that if a CEO is watching this, hearing you saying it can take several months just to do the research and thinking, they're going to be having some kind of minor attack, because it really does take that amount of time. I'm minded, again, as someone who's not a specialist but has led, you know, some various fundraising teams. What I've been particularly interested in is where we've been working on capital appeals, for example, and you've been able to produce a hierarchical list of, here are the trusts for whom we have an opportunity to approach. Here's the amount of money we think we're going to be able to apply for. And here's the percentage likelihood of success based on that experience of relationship and closeness to the project, et cetera, et cetera. And that's gold. That's absolute gold for me as a project leader, because I need to know, where am I going to spend my resource? You know, I need to know that we're investing whatever the resource is, whether it's internal, external, I need to invest that in the most likely areas of success. And having that priority, having the thinking done, just makes a huge change to that.
It is vital, and it's as scientific an approach as I've ever been able to find. If anyone's got a better one, let me know.
There's your challenge, everyone watching. There you go, let Andrew know.
The thing about trust fundraising is that every trust is different. They are infuriatingly idiosyncratic, and that includes the one that I'm a trustee of. You know, they're all completely different. As I said earlier, they've all got their own view of the world, and you know, we've just got to take each one at face value and you know, approach in a really bespoke way.
And there are different sort of ways that trust fundraisers, trusts choose to support projects. So some, for example, as you said, the big one, the Henry Smith, for example, then national funders. There are other trusts that will focus on smaller, more sort of local areas or regional areas. Is that fair? Is that, again, in the way that they look at the geography of it?
Yep. So, well, some, you know, we have what we call the usual suspects. So the Garth, the Westons of this world, and when it comes to capital, the Wolfson Foundation, and then you may have regional, county-based foundations, like down here we've got Sussex Community Foundation. But for every project, wherever you are in the UK, there will be a funder where your objectives and their objectives line up, and that goes for whether you're in London, Sussex, or the Outer Hebrides, and whatever kind of niche cause you're working for. So you've got to find the potential funders out there, and then make the case for support for why they should fund you.
And when do they choose? So again, I know from our experience that it's absolutely fascinating to me. Some funders are keen to be first in the door, that they won't entertain an application unless the thing hasn't, not a brick has been laid, or whatever the equivalent might be. And yet others don't want to come in until almost the last second. Well,
okay, some funders are happy to fund a project at any particular point. Again, talking about gurus from the past who really were influential on me, was Bill Bruty always talking about hatches, matches, and dispatches, and he still does. So the hatches are those funders that like to be in right at the beginning of a project. They like to say, I paid for that first brick, and they're kind of a bit more gung-ho, a bit braver. You then got the matches, and those are the ones that are a little bit more cautious, and they say, well, I will if you will, or I will if you've already raised a certain percentage of funding. Good example is Wolfson. So Wolfson will only entertain a stage 2 application if you're over 50% by the time of your second stage application. If you've raised 50% of what you need for your capital project, then they'll consider. For Western also, slightly less formally, but still give out that indication. I think Mercer's say a third. I may be wrong there, but so you have to understand what stage to approach a funder. And then the final category is the dispatchers, and they're the funders that belong right at the end and say, well, we pay for the last brick, or we pay for the doorbell, and they're often, and not always trust. It's sometimes an individual that will. An individual philanthropist will come along right at the end and say, hey, look what I did, I helped, I was the difference between the project happening and not happening. So it's about pressing those buttons. It's about understanding what is the optimum point at which to approach a particular funder.
It's an important point you raised about individuals there, actually, Andrew, because again, in my experience, I know that the way that people choose to give money has changed over the last few years. There's quite a lot of high net worth individuals or individual philanthropists who now put their charitable giving through a trust, largely for tax purposes. But it means that suddenly the engagement is there about with the individual, but actually the rules of engagement, the way to get money out of that, you still have to follow those structures. You still have to go through the personal endowment fund or whatever it might be.
Yeah. But I think the individual side of it is always really interesting when it comes to trust fundraising, because the old mantra about people give to people is so true, and I think it's even truer now as a result of COVID. I think there's a better opportunity now to build a rapport with funders and with trustees than ever, because of course we've now got something in common. We've got something in common with pretty much everybody. So you've got an opportunity there to pick up the phone, talk to a trust or a foundation, and whereas perhaps before they were less happy to take a call or a bit prickly, you've now got something common. Maybe they've been working at home and been hating it, and you have, or they've been personally affected by COVID. So there's that whole opportunity to engage, and I think the other interesting aspect is that. I talked earlier about how funders have adopted different strategies to cope with COVID. Charities have as well, haven't they? So some charities have just panicked and stopped everything. They furloughed their staff, including in some cases the fundraisers. Others have taken the opportunity to try new things, new ways of working. They might have moved to physical service online. So, there's all of these opportunities to talk to and engage with funders and say, look, and I think a really important point, Ash, is that, we always talk about the case for support. But I think within that now is the need for a COVID case for support.
Interesting. Okay.
Because what funders want to know, and you're seeing it increasingly, application forms now will include a question about COVID.
Mm.
So a funder will want to know what has been the impact of COVID on your organisation. So what's been the impact organisationally? What's been the impact financially? What's been the impact on your beneficiaries? And at the end of the day, it all comes down to sustainability. Are you a safe bet for them? How are you going to survive? We've seen charities in the last year, Ash, haven't we, where, you know, the reserves are down to the last month.
Yep.
We've got other clients who have got 3 years of reserves in the bank. So as a funder, looking at it through a funder's eyes again, I want to know who are the basket cases who are going to go to the wall in the next couple of months, who've got too much money in reserves, and you know, who really needs the funds, who's got a plan for getting out of COVID, who's been really creative and found a new way of working, and has got kind of an interesting take on their providing the work and serving their beneficiaries. So there's a lot to think about.
So there's a harder focus, therefore, you're saying, coming from the funders. Then they're more demanding. Then they're looking in more detail. They're looking in, you know, with a more critical eye before thinking about going, rather than just saying, yeah, that meets that criteria. There you go. We'll send you a check.
I think there's mixed messages, because what a lot of funders are saying is that they want to say, we want to help you. We understand it's really tough. We want to help you. At the same time, a lot of them are channeling government money.
Mm.
And what you're seeing on application forms now are some quite tough and onerous questions I've never seen before. So, for example, they're now asking for, so if you look at CAF, some of the community foundation applications, children in need, I think, they're asking for, questions like, what are the trustees' home addresses? What are the trustees' dates of birth? And it's like, oh, blimey, I don't know, I'm going to have to go and ask them, or get them to fill it in themselves, and then sort of, so there's this, they want it to be a light touch, but at the same time, and that's maybe because of the source of some of this funding, they're having to be quite onerous and in your face. So I think you really need, as a trust fundraiser now, to just to think deeply about the impact of COVID. Sit down with your trustees and your finance director and say, where are we really? What does this gibberish in our reserve statement actually mean? Have we got 2 years worth of free reserves, or have we got a month? And you and I spent ages trying to unpick the weasel words that so often appear in annual reports. You as the trust fundraiser are the one ultimately who are going to be talking to the funders. You need to understand this.
What it strikes me again as thinking as a generalist is we're talking about quite a lot of work here. We're talking about investment in time and understanding of building a proposition. We'll talk about proposition in a sec, but in terms of audience understanding, getting that hierarchy, building a list together, it's now taking more time to deliver a trust application to a Western or a community foundation, and therefore we must be even more confident that there is a likelihood of success before we invest the resource and time. So that planning process, again, as someone who is managing a trust resource, if I'm thinking about some of my time leading charities, I want to be certain that my resource is focused in absolutely the right areas, in focusing on those applications with the greatest chance of success, and not simply, and to be blunt, we've both seen this, I think, where it's simply, we expect you, and it's even sometimes on the fundraiser doing it, sometimes they've been instructed, we expect you to deliver 25 applications per month. Yeah. And if that kind of instruction is given, well, the solution to that is, what are the easiest and simplest and the most replicatable? I've done one, I can literally lift it up and apply that. And it is absolutely wrong at the moment to have that focus. It's got to be based on that audience understanding, the planning, getting that side first, and then the investment in the activity itself.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, the most depressing situations we see, I think, are where you've kind of got a trust fundraising factory. It's that sort of factory head of the trust fundraising world, where the chief executive said, you must get 50 applications out this month, And so you're in the ridiculous situation of a trust fund really just applying to anyone.
Whereas so this is a point at which I would kind of, this is, you know, me bigging you up and selling you a bit, in that I'm aware there are trust application factories out there. You can buy this stuff. You can go and buy a number of applications and a freelancer who will deliver that. And that's fine where there's, you know, small numbers. But you don't do that. I know from my time working with you, it is that focus on attention to detail, because that's where success comes from. You know, you can invest in trust fundraising, deliver as many applications as you like, and they won't be successful unless that work has gone in. And no, that's the approach that has to succeed.
And I think, you know, it's about putting the work in, building the foundations, and playing the long game. If anybody's out there watching this who's thinking that trust fundraising is about, you know, quick win, getting some income in within the first year, forget it. You know, you need a 3, 5, 10-year plan. You know, one charity that we work with in Brighton, you know, we've been working there for 10 years, and the trust fundraising income has grown exponentially now, and it's just, it's been. And the chief exec got back, you know, 10 years ago, and we started working this, and it's grown. And now you've got long-term partnerships, you know, it's totally sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think that's the secret. Play the long game, and don't look for quick wins.
Moving on, Andrew, we covered it slightly, but just wanted to pick your brains a little bit more detail on proposition. So, what kind of fund, again, I'm asking this as a journalist, what kind of activity are trusts interested in funding now? Because I've always known that, you know, for a capital appeal, there's obvious lists there you can go to, etc. But you raised a question earlier about core funding and the challenge of raising money for core funds, and how actually it's still the project approach that needs to be taken for core funding. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, all charities will always need core funding, but there are usually better ways to get that core funding than trust fundraising. There are some funders who will, you know, they're happy to give you £500, £1,000, usually up to about 3 or 5k. You might get unrestricted, but as soon as you get above that, then it's going to be restricted more often than not. There are some funders, very few of the larger funders. Garfield Weston is a good example, who are prepared to perhaps give you, 20, 25,000 unrestricted, but usually for charities they know and have supported before. So yeah,
it's building those projects. So in a capital, it's quite simple. There's a thing being built or created, or a new role is coming into the charity, and this is the new benefit that this person or this service or this building will deliver, and it costs this much, and there you go. And so that's quite a more simple. When it comes to core funding, or when we talk about core funding, you and I have seen, particularly in the last couple of years, charities that wish to spend new money, but they've put it in their core budget, but actually there's a definable project there, and one of the opportunities is to go and do the capital field planning thing, is to have that core that project budget, is to build the understanding of what it is and why we're doing it and how we're delivering it. Sometimes the challenge that I know that we found is that particularly finance directors, with apologies to any finance directors watching this, are sometimes reticent in having new restricted funds or designated funds. Of course, you know, we all want undesignated funds, unrestricted funds, but where that money, the number of times that you and I have worked on projects recently where there is money already in core budget to be spent, and simply by taking that money, defining the purpose for it, defining the need and the benefits of that money, we've been able to go and get project funding for it.
Yeah. You know, it's. I think it sometimes helps having an external consultant or freelancer coming in, because they can, look a bit more objectively at the work and go, there's a project there, desperately get out, and you haven't spotted it. And packaging that work up in the optimum way. What we can do in certain circumstances, of course, is to go down the full cost recovery route and build in, say, 10–15% on top of the project budget as a contribution to core. So there's always a way to do that, and that can be that's something that most funders are very happy to consider.
That's certainly a change that I know that I've, in my experiences, it used to be you couldn't, it was totally restricted, it had to be the project, but the understanding that actually even a new project has knock-on effects, has core cost implications, and funders are comfortable with that now. And they actually, a lot of them actively say, don't forget about your core costs when you're applying for this stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And I think some funders go down the full cost recovery route and are really comfortable with it, others don't. So and it's about doing your homework. Don't send a budget with full cost recovery in to a funder that you know or doesn't like it. You know, it's horses for courses. But you know, those funders that would consider it, well, then it's crazy not to look at, you know, which other staff are being involved, how much percentage time of the, you know, how much time does the chief exec spend working on that project? What are the sort of the hidden costs of that delivering that project? It's a no-brainer, really.
Okay. And how important is the case for support, the classic case of support document that many people will be familiar with? Is it vital to have a proper written case for support document for every project, for every proposition? Or can those be developed? Or I mean, again, where would you draw the line on the need for a case of support?
Well, I think it all boils down to the so what question. So when we're going into cold charities actually for the first time, the first question we ask is so what? Why does any of this matter? And as you know, we start to understand why the organisation does what it does, we're starting to pull together the case for support, aren't we? You know, it's kind of done informally first, but then there are certain big questions which we know funders will ask, and you know, there are very few shortcuts to this stuff. That's why I think it really helps to have a case for support, and we have a really good framework that we use at Pebble Beach, which, you know, is a certain number of questions, just probing it, getting to the bottom of the so what. Why do you do what you do in the way that you do it for the people that, or animals, or whoever that you do it for? And I mean, I personally would never advise a charity to work without a case for support.
Okay.
And so if you've got that core document, a core document for the organisation, which can then be adapted to accommodate information about a particular project, it's quite an easy, but easy thing to do. But you just got to do the big work first to get that down, and that information can then be transposed into application forms, into 2-page application documents or 10-page application documents.
Once you've got the big thing, you can then pick the bits you need.
Yeah, it's invaluable, you know. And you might spend a bit more time at the beginning doing it, but then you've got it, and it can be nipped and tucked and changed and tweaked as you have to.
Just one last point on proposition choice, I think, from me, Andrew, is that again, in my experience, certainly, I've seen where charities have chased the funding, where they've seen there's a funding pot available for some type of work, and they've gone, oh, there's money available there, let's go and get some of that. And then they've worked out how to spend it once they've got the money in. And it's always a disaster, because you end up with a little bubble of work that no one really cares about or understands, and that suddenly, when that funding runs out, there's no core budget to then replicate it. And I've unfortunately seen, you know, on a number of occasions, project staff who have got 3 years funding, for example, 18 months into their job, they basically stop doing their job and they become fundraisers trying to find some more money to keep their job going. And it's just so, it's really, really important. Again, the role of a trust fundraiser is to represent the interests and the views of the funders themselves, and to not allow the charity to go down these cul-de-sacs, down these rabbit holes, but to say, no, let's look at what are the strategic priorities. It comes back to that planning document right at the start, doesn't it, about organising the first. Let's make sure that we're identifying what the charity wants to do and how it wants to deliver it, and then go and get the money needed to achieve that, rather than what money can I go and get. Yeah,
I agree, but I do think, because there are no guarantees in trust fundraising, and you may be able to get, say, a 3-year grant, there's always going to be an element of risk. So, you know, a charity that that we work with in Worthing, a children's nursery, we've been very successful helping them get funding for the Senko project. You know, Children in Need and Ernest Kleinwort and Arthur Weston and some of these well-known funders have supported the project, and the security is there for that project for the next few years.
Oh.
There's no guarantee that will carry on.
Yeah.
It's a great project and a great charity, and I think they will. But there are no guarantees. So you have to, at some point, you go, we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do this. We're going to have to trust in ourselves. But at the same time, you need to put the effort into your fundraising and your trust fundraising and the proposition and the case of support to persuade those funders that you are brilliant and that you've been achieving what you said you would achieve.
And doesn't that therefore come back to that the very first point that we were talking about the relationship between the senior management and the project plan? Because if there is engagement at the beginning in this is where we think we want to go, what do we think the fundraising world looks like for that? Do we think this is something that can be sustainably funded? Then the trust fundraiser particularly, and the head, director of fundraising or the head of fundraising, whoever it might be, can be a positive partner in that decision-making process, can help to align and understand, saying, actually, yes, that is something that we feel comfortable that we can go and get extra money for, because there are, so obvious clear pathways for that.
I think, a trust fundraiser needs to understand the work of the organisation as well as the chief exec, perhaps even more so.
There's your bold. There's your statement on the front house. Again, trust fundraisers.
Because
you're not wrong.
You're in front of owners, funders, often individuals. You're on the phone. You're at events. You're selling the work, and you're not delivering the work, but you're expected to know everything about the work and everything that can possibly be done to enable a trust fundraiser to get to that point is money well spent. I remember when I was at Site Savers, I was doing okay, but it wasn't until I visited the eye care projects in Bangladesh, in Kenya, in Nigeria, and I actually saw what the work was about and saw the beneficiaries. And I saw Tajul, aged 8, have his cataract operation in Dhaka Eye Hospital, and then within 2 hours he was back in his village playing football and climbing trees. And that, when I take that, and I still well up and I'm thinking about it,
and you still remember the details very, very clearly all these years later.
And I was able to then write in a much more sort of three-dimensional, emotional, impactful way about the work of the charity than I was ever able to do when I was sitting in, at a desk in Hayward Heath.
And that brings us to the point about, again, in our experience, the most successful relationships are where the trust fundraiser particularly has a very strong direct relationship with service delivery staff, and beneficiaries, rather than going through the conduit of the marketing or PR department gets a case study and passes it over to the trust fundraiser, where there's a real understanding, because that's when the trust fundraiser can really do their best work.
Yeah, the best work is done when you get those light bulb moments as a trust fundraiser, and you get it, and it's really satisfying. It's so satisfying, but it's also satisfying when you see your operational colleagues, the service delivery people, getting it as well, getting why you're asking those questions. I remember the charity that I mentioned, the nursery in Worthing. I remember when we were doing a children in need application, and I remember sitting down with the nursery nurses working in the special needs team, and I was trying to get them to understand what outcomes are in terms of how children in need perceive them. And so I kept saying, so what, and trying to distill the work that they do on a day-to-day basis with, little Johnny or, whoever, why they do that, and eventually we start to get some really nice outcomes in terms of behavior, communication skills, confidence, personal skills, and it's just those light bulb moments are what it's all about, I think.
So we've looked at audience and understanding the potential audiences to approach and the proposition, how to develop proposition. We talked about case support. How does the engagement with trusts happen now? Again, when I first started, when you and I first started, trust fundraising was pretty much a letter writing exercise of sending in long-winded forms and application forms, etc. the world has changed significantly. Is it still, so two questions I think from me. How do applications actually get delivered now? Is it offline, online, etc.? And is it simply a missive going out, or are there opportunities to build relationships, as there would be, for example, with corporate funders, with high net worth individuals, etc.? Does that matter? Does that relationship building mean anything?
It's all of the above, Ash.
Yeah.
So yeah, some trusts still like application on papyrus with a wax seal, but others, increasingly it's online. Even some of the more sort of archaic funders now are moving to an online form with a dreaded word count.
I was going to ask you about that. As someone who's the writer, who writes, most of the stuff that we do at Peel Beach for our founders, I like a few words here and there. How important is it to stick to the rules, to stick to the word counts? Or
usually you don't have a.
That's it. It just cuts you off, does it?
Yeah, you don't have a choice. So what you end up doing is you'll write the application in a Word document,
right,
with the number count, and then you'll cut and paste, and then and then probably about 800 words where you've got 250. I mean, it's a good exercise in some senses, because you're distilling it down to the bare bones. But part of me is going, fundraising is about creativity and passion and adjectives, and I sometimes really get wound up by them, particularly if you have to do them all in one sitting and you can't save it. But I think funders,
that would be annoying. Okay.
Funders they're getting better. I mean, the trust that I'm a trustee of, we've got an application form which is it's a Word document, and we've got a word limit, but actually it's a Word document. So if you go over it, we're not going to go crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's about understanding. Your question about how to actually engage with funders. They're all different again. They're all different. So some won't take phone calls. Some will not take phone calls. Some say that they will not fund charities that they've not funded before, or they won't. There's no unsolicited approaches. But if the phone number's there, and they're all different. Some are really, really friendly. Some are really helpful. Some just, as I said earlier about Sussex Community Foundation and Children in Need and the Masons approaching charities they funded before, during asking them if they need support as a result of COVID. So some are very proactive. Others are sort of hide behind this. Some are frankly terrifying, aren't they?
I remember in terms of relationship building, capital appeal projects and out of London that you and I worked on quite a few years ago. And that particular foundation where we discovered one of the trustees, it was a foundation that was based in another part of the world, but we found one of the trustees lived locally. And I remember you meeting him a couple of times and basically just showing him around, saying, "This is what we're doing. What do you think?" And the outcome from that, I remember, was he effectively proofed the application before you sent it into him officially, because there was that engagement there. He recognised that this is a project that absolutely meets the foundation's wish list, and it benefits us both to have a successful outcome. So there was a real partnership there.
I think what it's easy to forget is that trusts and foundations are set up with one purpose, and that is to give money away. We want to give money away. They have to give it to the right charities, so the charities that are delivering work that align with their own charitable objectives. Yeah. So we, again, putting my trustee's hat on it, if we didn't get any applications for funding, well, it would be an awful situation. What do we do? We then have to sort of be more proactive and put feelers out through local community organisations or local schools and say, "We've got this money, come and get it." But so I think it's a lovely situation when a funder says, "We've got this money, can I help you with the application?" If you say that, or if you ask, if you don't, right, one response you often get is, "The next trustees meeting, the agenda's full." But if you apply in September, then there's a really good chance that we'll get this money, because I know that we've got, we get, additional 50,000 or something to spend
And you say it's the trust's job to give away money, but also the trust employs people to make those decisions, and there is a board that makes decisions. Those people's jobs are most successfully done when they're spending the money they have to spend on projects that are extraordinarily successful and meet the charity's needs. So again, there's mutual benefit for both sides there, you know.
Mutual benefit, and again, it's the old cliche, but people give to people. You know, they don't give to causes, they don't give to charities, they give to people. And you know, I can think of so many instances where you know, I've secured a grant or a donation because I've got on well with somebody, and there's been a rapport there. You've had a laugh, or maybe your kids go to the same school, or you know, you whatever. You know, but if you could find that the thing you have in common, and I think with COVID now, as I said earlier, we've all got something in common, haven't we? There is a reason now to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, because even if it's just to ask someone how they are, you know, it's much more opportunities for engagement, I think, now than there were 18 months ago.
So on that point, can I ask you a thorny question that quite often is, at the beginning of projects, we will quite often ask the senior management team, or particularly board of trustees, for their connections, to think about who they might be connected to. And I've yet to have an experience where this board of trustees has gone, oh, brilliant, yes, of course, we're delighted to share that. And yet the number of times we're told, oh no, I don't know anyone. And then actually when you dig into particularly sort of, you know, a more established board of trustees, they do have those connections that can open the door for a conversation, for an opportunity to say, could we just ask you about this? Do you think this is in the right area? And we're still, again, I remember, you know, over the last good few years, that happening on a number of occasions.
Yep, and I think now when we ask that question and they say, we know nobody, we're just a little rural charity in, you know, in East Sussex or whatever. We don't know anybody. We're not like that. We're not London based. We now say, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And every single time over the course of a project, suddenly these connections will be made, won't they? And we won't mention any names, but on several occasions, high net worth connections to major companies or trusts and foundations have suddenly appeared, where, you know, and the response is normally, well, oh, I didn't think that was important. So that goes back to what we talked about earlier about the research and the mapping exercise. Yeah, it is not time wasted. You literally need to ask everybody, sort of, you know, trustees, senior management, and service people. Who do you know? You know, and who supported you before? Who, you know, I was with a charity the other day where I'm a care home where I'm a trustee, and I walked in there. My first visit there when I started, I walked in and they told me that, you know, there was no funders, no trust support. There was a big wooden notice board there with all the founders on, including, you know, Garfield Weston and Ernest Kleinmorton, going back sort of 30 years or so. But it's like stuff gets forgotten about. You know, the kind of collective corporate memory is often not what it might be, and it often takes somebody from outside to just come in and prod people and explain, you know, why it's.
It's a really valid point. I was going to say, I think that again, the situation that I recognise with you and I is not that we suddenly discover a new pot of gold that no one knew existed. It's actually just saying, hang on a minute, you've got this stuff, you've got relationships, you have opportunities, you just have become accustomed to them, or you take them for granted, or you don't realise there's an opportunity there. And it's that fresh set of eyes often on a familiar situation that can make a lot of difference there.
I think often trustees and chief execs of less experienced or seasoned charities will expect fundraisers to be the well-connected ones, and particularly if we're consultants, you know, you go and go, so they'll say to us, who do you know?
Yes, I know.
Who do you know? Who's going to give us all the money?
Yes.
And then when we say, well, we don't actually know anybody, you know, we know who we can apply to, and we've got suggestions, and we can help you think it through. And we put the ball back into their court, and then they're going, oh, I don't know anybody. But then once they understand why this stuff's important, then they start to say, you know, they might get a little bit back book out and say, well, you should talk to so-and-so who's on the trustee board. He or she is really well connected, or you know, so it's a slow process, but it reaps dividends ultimately, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier about the occasion of applying to a trust and they're saying, we're not going to think about it, but actually reapply it this time. And that brings me on to the timing issue, in that, what are the rules around this? Are there trusts that you can just chuck an application into whenever and it doesn't matter? Or are there, how important is it to think about the calendar and the diary and to get that lined up?
It's really important, but those sorts of things come out of the research. So most funders will say whether applications can be made at any time. Some trustee boards will meet monthly. Others will meet once a year. But at the moment, some are not even meeting once a year. So it's a question, and that information is usually available. And if it's not, then you can always ring them and ask them, which is an opportunity to have a conversation with the human. So yeah, it really depends on what their particular.
And that comes out of the planning, that comes out of that research exercise again. So for us is that list that we've created a number of times for a number of our charity clients. Well, here's who we can apply to, here's the likely. And what I really love, again, as an ex, as a generalist and ex manager of fundraising teams, I love the fact that when you've done that research, you come back with a list that says, this is how much we think we can bring in, this is the percentage likelihood of success, and you simply multiply the two together, and that gives you your hierarchy. And that then allows you to then go down the hierarchy and say, okay, I can apply for that one whenever, but this one, this has to be in by July. So it might be you go and pick a prospect that's a bit lower down your list and you bring that to the top because you know that there's a timing issue there, whereas the other ones, you can wait a little while. It's that combination of planning that's important, isn't it?
And I think that's right. So that prospect list, that pipeline document, is not set in stone. It changes all the time. I mean, we've seen instances where you might expect one application to take 4 days. Well, it might actually take 8 days because the information's not there, or the project's more complicated than you think it's going to be, or the funder comes back and says, we'll fund this if you've raised 25% or something, and so you have to put that one on hold, and then you have to try and raise money from other sources. So it's not set in stone by any stretch. So yeah, it's a very fluid document usually, but it's surprisingly accurate, as I said earlier. The project that, I won't name it, but we've been working on for the last 3 years, Ash, where I predicted, using that sort of scientific formula, that we could generate 220,000 from trusts for that particular capital project, and we're up to about 200,000 now. And I think if a couple more funders come on board, so it's a really useful guide, I think.
But that was a really interesting example. That project is a charity that supports young disabled people, and it was their first time ever fundraising for a capital project, and so they really had to learn from the ground up. So again, that structured process was very new to them, but delivering that in the right way. What was fascinating is that our role there, and your role, Andrew, was not only to do the research but also to deliver the most important applications, because they didn't have the in-house resource. And at the start, we identified the 25 most likely applications, but I remember 3 of those had to change halfway through the process because actually their funding criteria changed and they dropped out. Therefore, a bit more research needed to come in. So again, it was a fluid model there, wasn't it? And one of those 3 that came in has just come back and just given.
Yeah, I think one of the funders spent out, wound up. So it's always changing, but you do need to start with a list. You've got to start somewhere. Yeah. You have to prioritise it, not only in terms of how much money those charities, the charitable trusts will give away, but also in terms of when they make the decisions and at what stage they will come in on the project. And you have to keep looking at that list and changing it.
Yeah. Last thing. Now, this is me again, as a journalist, as a creative, as someone who does a lot of the copywriting. I'm used to telling stories in fundraising. When we deliver appeals and campaigns, as your example from Site Savers you described earlier, it's that emotion, it's the reality of the effect of your giving on the beneficiary and the impact that has on their lives and whoever it might be. That's why we give. People give to people, etc. What we've described so far is quite a structural and functional approach. How important is the creative, is the emotion in trust fundraising? Is it just head? Is it just a cerebral decision-making process, or is it still head and heart? Are there still people making human emotional decisions here?
I think it's always people. It's always people. You know, there's not that, you know, these applications that we're making are not being assessed by some algorithm. They're being read by real people, most of whom are volunteers. So most of them have day jobs, who are busy, who, you know, who are legally obliged to give money away on behalf of their founder and their organisation. So they're looking for reasons to give. But no one who works for a trust or a foundation is going to be writing blank checks anytime soon. There still has to be that emotional engagement. And you have to put your heart and soul into every application to ensure that it resonates with the person reading it. You know, we talk about the so what question, but, you know, you need to be able to articulate why you do what you do in the way that you do it and the impact that it has on people's lives or guinea pigs' lives or whatever, whoever you're working for.
So picking on giving the example of that charity down here, the Young Disabled Persons Charity, when we developed the case of support for that, there was that starting point, that document saying this, answering the so what questions. Well, this is what's happening, and this is why, and this is the timescale, and this is the budget. But half of that case of support document is voice of a young a person accessing the service, of examples of a mother particularly. I remember talking about the experience that her daughter had there. And so those are the blocks, those are the elements that then you've been able to pull from that outstanding document and to bring in and use. So is it reasonable to say, again, as given that as an example, you've got those human stories there? Have those stories been part of the application process for that charity?
Yeah, and I think you just have to understand, and again, it comes back to your research, what the target funder is interested in. So are they interested in learning disability, or are they interested in, you know, housing, independent living for young people? Are they particularly interested in just funding charities in East Sussex or you know? So and then you take your case support and you build on the aspect which you know is most likely to resonate with the funder. So again, it's going back to pressing those buttons. But you've got to make that emotional connection. You know, looking at the occasions that the Brighton Trust that I sit on had this week, you know, there were a couple on there where you're going, oh my God, this is amazing. I just want to give you lots of money so you can do more of it. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. So yeah, you know, people give to people.
Can I just bring you back on something you said earlier about your trust, about people saying thank you? And one of the situations I think we both recognise is that there are times when the trust fundraising relationship seems to end as soon as the cheque arrives, and that. But as we talked about right at the beginning, is that relationship building, is that long-term opportunity, the fact that actually these are organisations will continue to fund you for time. How important is it to thank, but also to give feedback and evidence, you know, to be able to provide decision. We asked you for this money to deliver this stuff. Here's what's actually happened.
It's very important indeed. I think you're crazy if you get a grant from a charity, from a trust, and then you don't put a lot of effort into thanking them and keeping them informed, and then asking them again. You know, you've got to think about it as a relationship, because it means less work ultimately. If you've got that sustainable pipeline of funders, it means that you have to go out and do less new business work. You know, it's easier to manage an existing partnership or a relationship with a funder or a donor than it is to go out and spend hours, you know.
And that's back to the onion, isn't it? As you're describing, that actually, if you've got a successful, positive relationship with a funder who has given you money and has seen the benefit and has a warm relationship, and they are thanked and they are given information and evidence, they are much more likely to then give you money.
Why would they ever stop funding you if you are helping them achieve their charitable objectives vicariously, and you're doing amazing work, you're changing lives, you've got the evidence to show that you are transforming lives? what's not to like? You know, there's no, they may say, look, okay, look, we funded you for 7 years. Let's take a break. The door's open. Come back to us if you need, you know, suddenly, you know, you need emergency funding, come to us. Here's my phone number. So I think once you've got that initial grant, if you're not turning that into a longer term partnership, you're doing something wrong. The caveat there, of course, is that some funders say 1 year only, and then don't come back for another 3 years. Fine, okay, that's fine. But in most cases, from my experience, most cases, funders want longer term partnerships with charities that are delivering the right kind of work. They want the partnerships they want because it makes their life easier.
Right. Okay. Andrew, we'll finish there. It's been extraordinarily helpful. Thank you. And I'm always enjoy these conversations, these chats that we have, and for people watching, Andrew and I do this quite a lot anyway. We just sort of talk and chat and moan, and I hope that's just been helpful. I think that, just to summarize, the most important thing is trust fundraising is not a quick fix. This is not something that is literally, it's something that happens and you don't need to worry about it and money will come in. It is not. It is a long-term process about engagement, and that engagement at the top of the organization with planning is hugely important. And then for the trust fundraiser, it's about audience understanding, building the list of prospects, understanding hierarchy, development of proposition, having a case of support, understanding the beneficiaries, the reasons, answering the so what questions, and having heart and head in there. It's also about the media not simply firing out applications, but looking to build relationships because we've seen the benefit of those, and making sure that there's a thought process, a planning process about when to make those applications. And finally, and I'm delighted to hear this as a creative fundraiser, it's not simply a machine. It's still the thing that charity is founded on. Someone cares, that they burn deeply with a passion for a certain cause. And if we can engage that emotion, we've got a much greater chance of success. And the way we do that is by giving examples and telling stories. Yeah, and we include that in there. So Andrew, thank you for that. I think for those watching this, the role of Andrew and I, and the role that Andrew plays particularly in trust fundraising is twofold, really. Firstly, it's about that planning process. Again, I think I've seen that, and I've worked when I've been at charity of having externals come in, and external person coming in and be able to look at my charity and see that with a different eye and look for the opportunities that are being missed. But also where a charity is either setting up trust fundraising for the first time or looking to take trust fundraising to a next level, then what Andrew is extremely capable of doing, and extraordinarily successful at, is identifying the opportunities of setting that pathway to success and then handing over. Because a relationship with a consultant should never be permanent. It should always be about giving the opportunity and creating the structures that allow success, and then allowing the charity to move on in the future. But also, one of the things that we get asked quite a lot, Andrew, I know that when the charities ask us about trust fundraising, is there are plenty of consultants out there who can do some of the thinking. But what I've enjoyed working with you on is the fact that you then go and deliver the applications themselves. You roll your sleeves up and you actually deliver the applications, and that's I think quite special, because it's seeing that through. It's not just the theoretical handing that over and walking away with a consultancy fee. It's saying, no, it's taking responsibility. So the project that we've been talking about with young disabled people, for example, we promised that client that we would raise a certain amount of money for them, and we would charge them a certain amount of consultancy and time to do that. And we've delivered that. It's taken longer than we thought because there's been various and COVID to come in, etc. But we're very nearly at 100% for that project. And we will charge that charity the amount that we charged them, said we charged them 4 years ago. And we've stuck to that, and we haven't got a penny over. And that's really important, that honesty of relationship, I think, is why I enjoy the work that we do so much. So for those of you watching, I'm setting Andrew up for a fall here, but basically he and I are available for a conversation. As Andrew rightly said, every trust application is different and unique and special, and so is every charity. There is a different situation, and we are entirely happy to have that one-to-one conversation with you, if you wish, looking at your situation, giving you some advice, giving you some thoughts and some structure, and that's given freely and without obligation. Then, if we think that we can play a role, and if we honestly believe that we can add value, Andrew, that's something we always say, is that if we don't believe we can add value, we'll say so and we'll walk away. But if we honestly believe that we can deliver more net income and add value for the charity, at that point, we can have that conversation. But we're here as a resource, both of us, to answer those questions if you wish. So everyone watching, thank you for your time. Hope you've found this useful and enjoyable. If you'd like to get in touch with us, then please just drop us an email at hello@pebblebeachfundraising.com, or you can visit pebblebeachfundraising.com, the website, and the contact details are on there. And until the next of our webinars, we shall see you soon. Andrew, many thanks.
You're welcome.